Welcome to the Pastor's Connection podcast, where we delve into the heart of ministry and explore the challenges and triumphs of pastoral life. Join us as we connect with inspiring leaders, share insightful stories, and equip one another with tools for effective ministry. Together, we can foster a community of support, encouragement, and growth in our calling. Today's episode is brought to you by BroTech Design. BroTech Design is your go-to destination for exceptional web design and reliable hosting solutions. We create stunning websites that captivate your audience and ensure seamless performance, helping your church or business thrive online. Elevate your digital presence with their tailored services at BroTech Design. You can contact them today at info@brotech.design for assistance and to transform your online experience. We are looking forward to our episode today. It's my pleasure to introduce to all of you Tony Liuzzo. He's pastor of Fellowship Baptist Church in Columbus, Ohio, and president of Baptist Evangelistic Missionary Association, or BEMA. Good to have you on the episode today, Tony.
Thanks, Thomas. It's good to be with you. Excited about this.
Yeah, today we're going to be talking about walking through personal hardship as a pastor. And Tony, I know we're going to be spending a lot of the episode talking about your son Logan and his battle with cancer and your guys walking through that whole thing. But if you would, just take a minute and introduce your family to all of our listeners today.
Sure. About 30 years ago, I can't believe I'm saying it's about 30 years ago, I met my wife, Jenny. We were both freshmen at Pensacola Christian College, dated for a year and a half, got married, and then we went off to Trinity Baptist College for ministry, and we both graduated together, and I got an offer to go to Ohio to be the pastor here, or youth pastor, and that's where I started my family. And so my family has only known Ohio, being Buckeyes here in Columbus.
I'm sorry about that.
Yeah. We're not sorry about it at all. Just, the national championship title and everything. So, but it's
James Bell, who is a leader here at the network. He's from Michigan, Michigan fan. So feel free to give him a hard time.
Yeah, there's definitely a rival there. But God blessed me with my first son, Jordan. He's now 24 years old. My middle son is Logan. He is about to turn 22. And then I've got a daughter named Morgan, and she is almost 19. And so I've got 3 kids and a beautiful wife, and yeah, God is good.
Yeah, and it's amazing how fast it goes because...
Oh, it's crazy.
I've got 4 teenage daughters that range from 14 to 19, and I'm like staring down the barrel of having my kids out of the house, kind of like you are. So yeah, I'm not ready for it yet. I don't know if you can ever prepare for that.
I'm not the type of dad that was excited about my kids leaving the house. I love having my kids at home. It's like, I love being a dad.
Yeah, I feel exactly the same. So you kind of shared a little bit about moving to Ohio to become assistant or is it youth pastor there. Can you kind of share a little bit about your church experience, your background with us?
Yeah. So, I moved to, well, we were offered the position here in Ohio, and it was the only church that I candidated at. And so we were pretty excited. I would have never dreamed that God would move me from, growing up in the South all the way to the North like this and things. Yeah. So I came here as the youth pastor, and I was the youth pastor for 6 years. I absolutely loved it. I think some of the best years of my life was being the youth pastor. I absolutely enjoyed every second of it. And then after I was that for 6 years, I just felt the tug that I really wanted to help with some of the adult ministries and things here. And so I stepped into the assistant pastor role after our current assistant pastor had left. And it was awesome because at that point I was able to minister more to the parents than to the teens, which I love that aspect of it and stuff. So I worked for the founding pastor that was been here for most of his life. He was the one that started. Our church is about that 60th anniversary. We're the only 2 pastors that ever pastored here in 60 years.
Wow. That's incredible.
Yes, long heritage, amazing transition that we had. He got sick, and he asked me to intern while he was recovering from open heart surgery. And so I did that for a number of months, and then he just wasn't recovering, and he presented me before the church as the next pastor. And that was about 18 years ago. And so now I'm about to have my 25th anniversary. I've been the lead pastor for about 18 years and served in all the different ministries here and stuff. So yeah, I love it. This is home for me.
That's exciting. So I kind of have a somewhat similar experience where I went to work for my pastor of my home church as
Okay.
his assistant, and then he decided like, okay, I'm going to retire, and he came to
Mm,
me and was like, hey, I'm thinking about retiring. Would you consider being the next, candidate for the pastorate here? And
wow.
so I'm like, yeah, I'll definitely consider it. But and then he came and was like, and a couple weeks later, he's like, I'm retiring at the end of the year, and this was like September or October, and I'm like,
Oh,
oh
wow.
geez,
Yeah.
this
No
is
time to prepare for that.
quick. No, and I was happy being a youth pastor.
Mm,
I loved it. And then all of a sudden, I didn't tell anybody, even my wife. All of a sudden, one day there was just this click where it was like,
mm,
you know what? I
yeah.
feel like I'm supposed to lead. And it was less than 2 weeks later that he came to me about this whole situation. So he stepped down December 31st, 2009. I was voted in, and I stepped in the very next day, January 1st, 2010. So
Wow.
there was really no gap for our church, and I led there for 11 and a half years. So I kind of identify with that part of your story there. And was it a similar situation where literally he stepped down the next day, you're taking over?
No, so he stepped in. Well, actually, when it actually happened, the internship was like an overlap of the time that he was recovering from his surgery. And then he became the pastor emeritus. So he kept an
Okay.
office. He was here. He helped teach Sunday school. He'd fill in for the pulpit when he felt up to it and stuff like that and stuff. So, but yeah, when I was brought before the church, I took the pastorate right after that and stuff. So, but yeah, it was weird. I was in my early 30s, and yeah, it was quite the transition. But you could see God's hand in every bit of it. If when I first came here, I would have never imagined that I would be the pastor. I never had that ambition. You know
Yeah.
what I'm saying? It wasn't like one day I'm going to be the pastor. I never thought like that. But like you said, it just clicked, and I could just see God's hand at work, and God just put everything in place.
Now, how was the transition? Because I know sometimes if the guy ahead of you, especially if he's a
Hmm.
founding pastor, is still there,
Yeah.
like that can be a difficult situation. So how did that kind of play out?
You know what? I get that question asked all the time just because he wasn't just the previous pastor, he was the founding pastor,
Yeah.
and so he dug this thing out of the ground and built the buildings himself and all that other stuff. He was the general contractor and stuff. So he had a
Oh,
lot of
wow.
heart invested in this ministry. But I can tell you he was a godly man, and we never butted heads. We had disagreements. There was things that I did that he would be like, "Yeah, I wouldn't have done it that way" or whatever. But he would never publicly say anything like that. He would back me up 110%. We were really good friends, and we would share about the different things that we disagreed on, but never had a falling out, never butted heads, never was in strife or anything like that. And then his wife worked for me. She was the music director, choir director, and she was like one of my closest friends and supported me 110% in everything that I did. And they just were spiritual people, man. I mean,
Yeah.
just it wasn't about them or their titles or their reputation. And when people would come to him and ask him like, "Hey, why are we doing this? And we should not do this or whatever," he'd say, "Why don't you go talk to my pastor about that?" And he was
I love
referencing
that.
me.
Yeah.
And it was just it was such a godly example of what it's supposed to be. You know what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
it was awesome. So then I preached his funeral about 5 years after I became the pastor, and that was such a high honor to and tell these stories and talk about his life and his legacy and stuff. So pretty amazing. I had a
Yeah.
great transition. It was a great transition.
That's great. And I love hearing about men of integrity like that who are more gospel focused than
Yeah.
themselves. And that's kind of the situation I had with my pastor. Um, I tell people when we have this conversation, like if it was anybody else, I probably would have asked them to find another church.
Mm.
But he just loved God and he wanted to support me however he could. Similar situation where I changed almost everything he did, and he disagreed with a lot of it, and
Yeah.
we would have conversations, but same thing, when somebody came to him, he would support me 100%. And so it was actually interesting on a few of the topics that I would sit down with the scripture and kind of share him some things in the Bible, and he would be like, oh, I never really noticed that
Yeah.
or looked at it that way before. So just the humbleness. Some of these guys are just so incredible, and it's a blessing to have, walked with them, learned from them, and now, to turn around and have that same opportunity with the people that are underneath our ministry. And I think about this podcast as well and what we're doing to try to be a help and a blessing to pastors. And I know there's a lot of pastors out there who have a difficult time in the ministry or have a difficult time through personal struggles and everything else. And, you and I have had a conversation a couple years ago when your son Logan was going right through, I mean, in the
Yeah.
thick of the battle
Oh
on
yeah.
our family meeting podcast. And we talked about the day. Like the day is going to come where he's going to beat this cancer thing, but you weren't
Yeah.
there yet. And just your heart,
No.
your vulnerability, your authenticity. I said, I need to have a conversation with Tony here for these pastors to identify with and to be able to contact you and learn from you. So as we think about this journey kind of you've been on, whether it's Logan or other situations, can you just kind of share how it's shaped your perspective on personal hardship?
Yeah. I've thought about this a lot just because, we all go through hard times. And I don't know, you kind of think that you're living in a bubble and you're not going to encounter all of these things. But it's really opened my eyes to totally understand that hardship can happen to any of us and that your world can be flipped upside down in a minute. It really
Yeah.
can. Life is short and life is hard. And just because you're living for God and serving God doesn't mean that you're not going to encounter hard times, And I've had people say things like that, say, I don't know why God would do this to you when you spend your life serving God. I'm like, the curse of this world and sin and all the problems that we have does not go around us as followers of God or as pastors or preachers. We're in the battle like everybody else. And
Yeah.
I didn't see this at the beginning of it. There's a lot of things you don't understand. We ask a lot of the questions of why is this happening, and God, why aren't you doing this? And you try to figure it out. And it's human nature to try to figure things out. But James 1 talks about, the trying of your faith changes you. It works patience. It builds endurance. It makes us stronger. And I can honestly say that I'm a different pastor, and people will tell me that all the time and just say, when they're talking about me as a pastor, was this like pre-cancer or post-cancer with Logan, just because it did change me so much. It makes you stronger. God uses hardship to prepare you for more. And
Yeah.
Thomas, you and I both know this as pastors. It's easy to preach things. It's harder to live them,
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
to walk in a hospital room and tell people like, God's got this and God's got a plan, and don't give up and keep fighting, keep your eyes on Christ. But man, when it's you and it's your kid, you've got to go through some of those things for you to know from your walk with God that He is strong and powerful, and we say all the time He never fails. Well, I can tell you He doesn't fail.
Yeah.
But it's changed just for the good. I can tell you that it's changed my perspective, and all things do work together for good.
Yeah, they definitely do. And I think about, the time I carried my wife, literally carried her into the emergency room, and
Mm.
I'm staring down possible life without her, and raising four girls. And like you said, it's one thing to preach it, and it's one thing to walk into a hospital room and try to encourage somebody else, but it's another thing when you're sitting there all alone and your
Yeah.
wife's in surgery, your son is going through this, and it's like, what do I
Yeah.
actually believe about God? What do I
Yeah.
actually
Yeah.
think about his presence and his power and his protection and all of those sorts of things? And
Mm.
it does crack me up when people are like, well, if you just follow Jesus or you just have enough faith, and it's like Jesus himself said, in this world, you are going to have tribulation.
Yep. That's right.
you, you're gonna have hard time. And so, but there is that moment where, okay, and I don't remember exactly how it happened for you, but there's moments where it's like, okay, we think something's going on, and then to get that diagnosis of what's happening. Can you kind of explain how that progressed, where all of a sudden now the doctor's telling you your son has cancer and this is what it is and this is what it means?
Yeah. I know a lot of people know her story, so I won't go deep into it and stuff like that. Just, it started off so simple. My son had a cough, and people get coughs all the time.
Yeah.
He was graduating from high school, and then he had to go through during COVID 2021 with having the cough. And then he, anyways, a series of things that we were trying to get him tested for and stuff like that to figure out what was going on. And he was working at the church. He was in our creative team and sitting at the computer, and he passed out. And my son has never passed out. He had no problems like that whatsoever. So we scheduled some tests. So there was some things on his test that he did with his heart rate, that his heart rate would change at random places from sitting up and laying down and stuff like that. So they said before he goes off to college, we'd like to run some tests and just make sure he's okay. Just rule out everything. We didn't think anything about it. So my wife took him to
Yeah.
get this X-ray, and my wife called me and was like just frantic and said his heart is moved 3 inches out of place. They think there's a mass pushing his heart. And so this was the beginning of our cancer journey, and
Yeah.
it rocked us. I mean, it wasn't just bad, and that's why it was like we hear stories all the time. This was the size of a small football in his chest, wrapped around his heart, his arteries, pushing on his lungs. It was so bad that he couldn't have surgery, or he would die just from the stress of his heart. And so we went through 5 months of intense chemo, 50 nights in the hospital, 72 bags of chemo. He had like 12 PET scans, CTs, MRIs during that time, blood transfusions, and then we went into surgery. And surgery was the only option to get the cancer out. It had to be surgery, and it was like, we feel good. We're just going to get in there and cut it out. And 3 hours into the surgery, we got a phone call and telling us that the surgeon wants to meet us in a private room, which, your heart just sinks because, the surgery was supposed to be 6, 8 hours.
Yeah. So this is
And
not good news. I mean,
no, no, and I thought at some point, my extreme faith was like that we got in there and there was nothing there, saying, I mean, like,
yeah.
but this eerie feeling just came over as he walked through the door, and we actually have this recorded we made a documentary, and we have the actual doctor stating this as he walked in and said to us, because we were recording it just so that we didn't miss anything.
Yeah.
And he said, I am so sorry. Things were far worse than we ever imagined.
Hmm.
It's unresectable, which means that he can't be cancer free because it's unresectable. Said it invaded his pericardium, which is the sac around his heart. We think it might be in his heart. He said that we are looking at it being encapsulating his arteries. And then a couple of days later, he came in and told us, he said, I've seen it with my with my own eyes. He said, if we fight really hard, he was trying to be positive that your son, we can get him to live 2 to 3 more years.
Hmm.
And that's not that you talk about your world being flipped upside down. Here, we were thinking that he'd be going to college after surgery, and now
Yeah.
they're telling us to brace for the fact that he would die in 2 to 3 years. So this put us on a 18-month plus cancer fight with trying to preserve his life of treatments. And they said eventually it will stop working and eventually he'll have to make the decision to stop fighting. Well, we hit that point where his body was no longer responding to treatments. And we had ups and downs. We had major victories and major defeats around that time. I mean, it
Yeah.
grew, it shrunk, all these things. And then we had to make decisions of what we were going to do. And they said the next things are going to hurt him and to preserve his life. So he either has to stop fighting or he has to go down some paths that are going to create more issues. So they sent us to Cleveland Clinic um, to get a second opinion. And I thought, I don't want to hear just another, well, I mean, because we already knew the facts.
Yeah.
And we sat in a room, and the guy said, this one guy that was just an absolute genius, he was a godsend. We were praying this time, Lord, just do something unexpected. Lord, do something that's not expected. And this guy says, you're going to think I'm crazy, but I have an idea that we have no idea if it would work. Logan would be the stats of this. There's no stats to prove why this would work.
Wow.
But if you guys want to take a leap of faith with us, we're willing to try to save your son's life. So we had to move to Cleveland for like 6 weeks. He went through experimental targeted radiation on the heart, which is just not a normal thing. And then we went in for surgery like 4 weeks later. And they came out after, which they thought it was going to be like a 12 plus hour surgery, replacing like valves and like major over the top, 2 surgical teams, bypass machine, all this other stuff. 3 hours into surgery, the lady comes out to give us an update, and she just says, well, they're closing him up. And we thought that it failed. And
Yeah.
we said, why are you closing him up? And they said, they got the tumor out. And there's 45 of us in the lobby just weeping and crying and praising God and gathering
Yeah.
to pray. And it was an absolute move of God. It was an absolute, I can't even begin to tell you, Thomas. It was a God moment like you would read in the Bible.
Yeah.
And it changes so much, changes so much. But yeah, it was a crazy thing. But navigating through that was crazy, just at the beginning of it, the shock within weeks, just being a cancer patient and stuff like that. And you just think, well, we'll just pray and it will go away. You know what I'm saying? I mean, that's the
Yeah.
answer, pray. And through the first scans and stuff like that, I'm thinking we're just going to pray and we're going to have the next scan. They're going to come in and say, well, it's gone. Well, the scan just came back to tell us that it was worse. And
Hmm.
so, yeah, initially going through it, it was shocking and life shaking. It really was.
Yeah. And, you think about that roller coaster ride that lasted so long,
Yeah,
so many downs, a lot more downs than ups, but man, those ups when it's like, hey, we've got a little bit of hope here, like we've got an idea, and then to
yeah,
have it come through and work. Um, but we talk about the faith because you are a man of faith. You had faith, and then there's like, okay, God, you're not doing what I believed you were gonna do.
right.
But how has your faith influenced your ability to cope with the challenges that cancer has brought to your family?
Well, we're here to be real, right?
Yeah, yeah,
So, at the beginning of it, I struggled just because I think faith is something that we try to quantify, and just like if I have enough faith that that God will knock this out, and I learned that through this, that I had faith in God, and I believe that God could do anything, and I believe that God was with us, but I think God taught us that faith is more of a journey than it is quantifying the quantity that you have. It's not just
yeah,
how much you have. It's, and I think of God taught me a lot of things through the stories that I would study with like Abraham and Isaac. And that story was God wrecked his thinking. It was like, why would God have me give up my son? And he had to have that thinking as he walked up the hill.
yeah,
And faith is truly moving forward when nothing makes sense. It is still getting up, still preaching that God is good, still praying, still reading your Bible, still sharing the truth, even though you can't see it in front of you. And Abraham for 3 days could not see the answer in front of him of what God was going to do.
Yeah.
And sometimes we give up in the journey, but we can preach all the time about our faith, but faith is something you live out. It's something you trust God every morning when you wake up brokenhearted and scared to death. Abraham did not experience the provision of God until he got to the place where God wanted to give him the provision. And so, our faith grew every step that we took, the ups and downs and things like that.
Yeah, and you think about the provision of faith that God gives us for every single day.
Yeah,
I often think about, that prayer that Jesus gave when he was teaching his disciples to pray, where he said, pray, give us this day our daily bread. And I'm like,
yeah,
well, most of us as Americans, like we have some international listeners that, they literally have people that they know, if it's not themselves, where it's like, I don't know how I'm going to feed my family today.
yeah,
But for a lot of our listeners, they don't have that. Like, we just don't worry about where our next meal is going to come from. But there are a lot of things that I need today. And man, when you're walking through that hardship, and maybe this is you as a pastor listening right now, you're walking through that hardship, and today you're just like, God, I need enough faith to get through this day.
right. One day at a time.
And that's exactly what God gave to you, even in the moments where it was like, no, I'm not just going to bring the scan back and show you that your son is healed. Like,
Yeah,
we've got a journey we're taking together, and it's a difficult journey, like you talked about with Abraham climbing the mountain. But you've been coming along this journey now, and you even mentioned, like, okay, people asking you, is this like before cancer or is this after cancer? Can you just kind of describe what ways your son's battle with cancer has impacted your ministry and your relationship with your own congregation?
yeah. It's great. I can tell you, it's awesome to be part of a church family, and I don't know how people do it without.
Yeah.
We talk about the church, and you go there to hear preaching and being edified and stuff like that. But man, it is a family that my church, my ministry, we went through this together. And I can honestly say that God used Logan in all of our lives, like as a church family. Recently, we had two people diagnosed with cancer, and when I talk to them, the very first thing that they say is, "I saw what God did with Logan. I saw how we prayed with Logan. I saw how your family came together with Logan." And God just brought that to my mind as soon as I heard the word cancer in their lives.
Wow.
Just you think about preaching and living out the illustrations that we try to preach on Sunday, the messages and stuff like that. But God sometimes will use you as a pastor for the way that you walk through trials to be that example to church. And I say that because we were very real with our congregation. I told them the Sundays that I didn't preach because I wasn't in the right headspace.
Yeah.
I would get up and testify of just my fears and how I was feeling and stuff like that. It's not like I was falling apart, but I was trying to teach the audience, teach my congregation, our church family, to be real,
Yeah.
and that faith is a struggle, and it changed all of us. When we go through hard things, we'll stop the service and have people come forward and pray with them, and we would organize and stuff some of that stuff before, and in the hallway, if I know somebody's going through a hard time, we stop and we pray. Just, hey guys, let's gather together, let's pray over them. And I didn't do that before. You know what I'm saying? It's not that
Yeah.
I would say, hey, I'm going to pray for you and God's got a plan or whatever. But now we just grab hands or, put our arms around each other and gather in a circle. I don't care where we're at. We've done it all over the place.
Yeah.
It taught us to trust God and trust God in the midst of it, and not just sing about the power of God in songs, but truly know that God is with us as a church. And so I can see the reason that God had us do. You say, why did God allow you as a pastor? Because I had a platform. I think God wanted his miracle and this struggle to be visual
Yeah.
for us to see it together. You know, God has a purpose in all that he did. You can't see it in it, but I can see it after, you know, for sure.
And it just reminds me of Hosea. I'm going and preaching through Hosea at our church here in Florida. And,
Mm,
you know, God had Hosea do some difficult things, and so
yeah,
he could use his family as an example for the nation. And I think a
right.
lot of times as pastors, God puts us in circumstances, obviously for our own personal growth and for our family and everything else, but to be that example for the
Yeah,
congregation. Um, and I love that you were open with your congregation about, you know what, I'm not in the right headspace to deliver a message today. Like
yeah,
I have my own battles and struggles, because I think sometimes as pastors we try to put off this idea that spiritually we're up here somewhere,
yeah,
or our people have this idea, even if we're not the ones putting it off, that we're spiritually up here higher than them somehow. And it's like, no,
right.
we're exactly like you. And
Exactly.
we struggle. I mean, when our families are hurting, we're struggling. But using that as an example for your congregation to follow, and that brings some encouragement even after the fact, where it's like, okay, God,
Yeah.
I'm starting to see a little bit of why you've done this, and it is a beautiful thing.
You know, the number one comment that I got, like, it wasn't like, man, I'm so encouraged by your faith, Pastor Tony, or, you know, like how strong you are. It was more like, thank you for being real.
Yeah,
Thank you for showing us that faith is a struggle. And thank you for showing us that sometimes you don't have it all figured out. And I would challenge every pastor, one of the greatest things you could demonstrate before your church is just being authentic. And that's not weakness. You know, sometimes we
yeah,
view that as weakness. But it's just being, I don't want to be a hypocrite. I don't want to go to the pulpit and pretend like I'm okay when I'm not, because I don't want people in the church to pretend like they're okay when they're not, you know, and we've got to demonstrate that if we want to teach that.
yeah. And you're right. It doesn't make us weaker. It to me, it is about strength. It's harder to show your vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
It's harder to be real. And one of the things I've loved about the church that I've noticed over the last 15 years or so is seeing pastors step down off of a pedestal and
Hmm.
become real and vulnerable. And I think that has a much better opportunity to make an impact on our congregants when we do
Oh
that.
yeah.
Can you just discuss any specific moments during this journey that profoundly affected your understanding of suffering and resilience?
Man, like we said, we had so many highs and lows, and I can tell you, we had a few that were just like extreme lows. You know, um, one of them was obviously when the first surgery failed after the 5 months, because we were just so confident. You know, when you pray and you pray and you just think, I prayed, therefore God's going to answer. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? We almost like bring God down to our level and say, well, I did I did the journey of prayer. You know, I said the words or whatever, and you know,
Yeah.
we know that God's ways are not our ways and things like that. But in my mind, I thought, I even told the nurse as they were prepping Logan, I said, today you're going to see something pretty amazing in that surgical room. I said, I think you're going to be really blessed by what God does today. I was that confident.
Yeah.
And then when he came out and he told us that the surgery failed, our world was just crushed. I mean, I can't even, I don't, there's no way to put into words just how devastated we were. Our family was staying at a hotel because they all came in and they weren't allowed to be in the hotel because it was a hospital. So they had to be in a hotel lobby because of COVID. And we drove over there while he was in recovery because we couldn't see him. And I walked in there and I'm trying to be all, you know, strong, you know, I was
Yeah.
like, hey, it's okay, whatever. And I'm telling you, it just built up the reality that my son was going to die, and the fact that the prayer didn't work and things like that. And that's the thought that I was going. It's like, okay, in that moment, prayer doesn't work.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, here's the hard reality, Tony, that you didn't ever really know, that it doesn't work the way you thought, and the stories aren't as real in the Bible as what you thought.
Yeah.
And I just walked away from the group, and we had like 40, 50 people in that lobby. And I just walked away and like almost like just totally fell apart. I wept so hard that I couldn't catch my breath. And it just took everything out of me. And I remember getting up and like just, like I turned around and to them I walked back, and then God just hit me. It's like, who do you think you are telling them that, it didn't work or whatever? Who do you think you are to tell me that it's over? It's not over.
Yeah.
And I said those words, and people remember. I said, it's not over. And I think that God shows grace in your time of doubt. God loves us, and God stands with us even when we're not standing with him. And that was one of those times that, I mean, and now even my kids will say, Dad, remember you when you said it's not over, even though we were crushed. And I'm thinking, that wasn't me.
Yeah.
That's not what was going
Because
through
I
my
thought it was
mind.
over. Yeah.
It's just what God did. And we had another time. This is a longer story, but I won't get into it. Uh, we were buying a car for my daughter who wanted a Kia Soul. Never buy a Kia Soul. That's some advice I'll give to you guys right now. Never buy a Kia Soul.
If you don't
Long
take
story.
away anything else from the
It's just
episode, do not buy a Kia Soul.
Don't buy a Kia Soul. And so it was a lot of things going on with Logan. So I was like, I'm going to spend some time with Morgan. And so we found one that was 6 hours away. And so I rented a car, and we're going to do this road trip to drive there, spend the night, and drive this new car back the next day. And so we ended up totaling our car on the way there in the rental car. Deer pulled out in front of us, and we totaled the car. It was a
Jeez.
terrible accident. So we're on the side of the road. We're okay. The car is not. It was literally a total loss. We end up sitting on the side of the road for 3 hours, and my wife calls me and says, Logan's not doing well. I said,
Oh,
what do you mean he's not
jeez.
doing well? She said, something's wrong, Tony. Something's really wrong. I'm taking him to the hospital. This was during his treatments. And she calls me back and she says, they're saying now that they want to check for brain cancer. And I am on the side of a road sitting in a wrecked total vehicle in the middle of nowhere waiting for a tow truck that never actually showed up.
Hmm.
And you talk about just being like, God, what are you doing? We're praying for a miracle, and now you gave my son brain cancer, and so we ended up getting a ride to local. And so, and honestly, I messed up the story. We didn't know that they were speculating brain cancer till the next morning. But anyways, she was taking them to the hospital to get checked out that night. So we spend the night in a hotel. We get an Uber to drive us to the rest of the way because I already partially paid for this car.
Yeah.
And my wife calls to tell me, hey, they're doing scans because they think it's brain cancer. It could be something like that. They want to rule this out. So we get to, we're waiting for the scan results. We get there, buy the car. I'm driving back. We're 15 minutes into the drive, and the motor blew in the Kia Soul.
Oh, my
They
gosh.
in the car that we just bought, and they changed the oil and did not put oil back in the car. It literally blew up on the side of the road, smoked, all the things. And I am literally staring like, God, could this get any worse? I
Seriously.
am 6 hours away from home. I totaled a car the night before. I'm sitting in a car that I just bought that's totaled. My son is in a brain scan right now to see what's going on. God, I can't do this. I'm just literally, you say you won't give us more than what we can bear. Well, I can't. I'm like literally just sitting there crying at this in this car. We called the company. They apologized. The owner of the car lot went and picked us up and put us on a flight and said, we apologize. We're going to refund the car. This is so embarrassing.
Hmm.
So I text my wife before I get on the flight saying, what are the test results? She says, we should get them back in the next 30 minutes to an hour. I had to be on a flight for like 2.5 hours, 2 hours, waiting to see if my son had brain cancer. So I'm in this flight and I'm staring out the window. I've got my, headphones in. I'm listening to music and I'm just praying. I had to put my head in the window just so people wouldn't see me like break down, like
Mm-hmm.
wondering what is my world about to fall apart in the next like 30 minutes. And I'm flying over these clouds and I'm just like, God, you created all this. God, you spoke this into existence. How can you not just speak life into my son? I just don't understand how I could go through this. And where are you? And sometimes God will put you in a holding pattern to where you can't do anything, talk to anybody, fix anything. God put me on a plane so that he could have 2 hours just to sit with me and talk with me.
Yeah.
And God literally just staring out that window, just he changed my heart. I'm just like, I am in control. And I landed and I turned on my phone and there was a giant family chat and it was laughing emojis and thumbs up and all this other stuff. And I'm scrolling through trying to see what happened. And
What's
it
the
wasn't,
news? Yeah.
yeah, what's the news? And it ended up not being brain cancer. It was just one of those times that God had to put me aside to say, I've got this. Trust me, and stop freaking out every time something seems to go wrong. And those were times that when there's a bunch of times like that, but God did a lot in those times like that. When you think it's falling apart, God's just teaching you another lesson.
Yeah. Yeah. And, here you are trying to balance a lot of things. You're trying to balance ministry and the pastorate
Mm.
and also your family and the situation there. How did you maintain a balance between your responsibilities as a pastor and
Yeah.
your role as a father during such a difficult situation?
All right. I said this, and I know that you would agree with this, that family comes first.
Yeah, I got the shirt
No,
on right now.
yeah, that's right. Family comes first. But I mean, I think we always struggle with that in ministry, of like finding that balance and stuff like that. I remember when Logan was first diagnosed and I was in the room and I'm making phone calls because I had a full schedule and preaching and all this other stuff. And I literally on the phone, like said, cancel everything for the month. Go through my calendar. I'm not preaching. I'm not teaching, whatever. And I got off the phone and Logan looked at me and he said, Dad, did you just say for the month? He said, you've never done that. And I said, Logan, we've never been through something like this. I said, my only
Yeah.
priority right now is you. I said, and our church is behind us. I said, they said that before I said that. And I used that time to, talking about, I still wanted to be the pastor. I didn't want to like disappear. And so I preached when I could. That's what
Yeah.
I did. But I preached what God was doing in my life. I preached a lot of one-off messages. I wasn't doing a sermon series during that time. And I used the journey as my message. And I was just sharing what God was doing. And I had to say no. And Thomas, this was weird. It was weird switching roles because a lot of times we don't understand that even as pastors, we are still part of the body of Christ. I'm still a
Yeah.
member of the local church.
Yeah.
And at that point, I had to let the body minister to me rather than me minister to the body. And that's hard. But I think it was healthy for God to show me what it was like to be on the other side of it. So I think there was probably times that I didn't balance it right. You know what I'm saying? There was times that
Sure.
I probably could have done it better, but the church showed grace and my staff carried it and stuff. So sometimes you just got to let go and know that the ministry is not yours, it's God, and God has a plan and God will take care of it.
Yeah. So let me ask you this question, kind of an offshoot of this of what we're talking about now with the
Okay.
balance, because a lot of our listeners are pastors of small churches that don't have staff. They're the guy.
Yeah.
What kind of recommendations would you give to them where it's like they don't have an assistant pastor to say, "Hey, I need you to preach this morning
Yeah.
because I'm not up to it." Are there recommendations you can give to them? Maybe some ideas of where they might be able to turn for some help with some of the pastoral responsibilities while they have to shift and focus on some other things?
Yeah, I would say sometimes has us step back so he can have other people step forward. And there's probably people in your in your auditorium on a Sunday in your church family that you're thinking that deacon or that retired pastor, well, I don't think they could handle this. And God does a work in their life by giving them the opportunity. And sometimes God will shuffle things around to give people an opportunity to grow in areas that maybe they would have never had the opportunity before if God didn't have you step back. And I would encourage you with like local pastors, when you're going through a hard time, you are not alone.
Yeah.
I could not have done this without, like, even you guys, Thomas, of how much you were a blessing to me in the heart to heart conversations and stuff. Man, reach out to local pastors, reach out to this network of pastors and just say, hey, I'm struggling right now. I can't do this. You know, People came in and left their churches. Even though I had a staff, I still had other pastors that came in just to give us breaks and preach for us and stuff. So don't do it alone. Reach out to us. We're in this together.
Yeah, most definitely. And I would say, um, along that lines, to one of the things I've tried to always do, most of my ministry, I've been the guy, the only guy.
Yeah,
And so I've always tried to have at least somebody that I'm working to develop that can speak, that can handle certain responsibilities so that for things like vacation, I want to go on vacation. I believe it's
yeah,
important to spend time with my family and everything else. And so that way there's at least somebody there where I can turn and I can say, hey, you know, and working to develop and mentor people for things like that. But as you mentioned, the Pastors Connection Network as well, like if you reach out to us, and we'll give you that contact info in just a little bit
mhm,
if you don't already have it, you reach out to us or you reach out in the Facebook group, like there are people who would love to help you. They'd love to have conversations with you. They'd love to have the opportunity to help fill in your pulpit or whatever else is you have to take care of
absolutely.
certain things. And that's one of the things I love about this network is it is truly people who love, care, and support each other as we
Hmm.
seek to preach the gospel around the world. So let's talk about unexpected blessings or lessons
Yeah.
learned through this experience. What are some things you can share with us about that?
Well, I mean, I think one of the big lessons that I could say was like, when we say that nothing is impossible with God, I can say nothing is impossible with God.
Yeah.
They told us from every angle that this was not going to happen. When when the um when the surgeon at Cleveland Clinic got the cancer out, through some people that we knew here in Columbus that work at the hospital, told the surgeon here in Columbus, said, that boy Logan. What he said, well, you probably don't remember Logan. You have a lot of people that you do surgery on. And he says, Logan Liuzzo, the 18-year-old boy, he goes, I remember it like yesterday. He said, I'll never forget how bad that cancer was.
Hmm.
And he told him, he said, that boy is cancer free today, sir. He said, he is not cancer free. He said, I saw his cancer. I literally touched his cancer. He's not cancer free. He said, well, he is. He goes, well, if he is, that's a miracle. But he didn't believe the guy that told him.
Yeah.
That surgeon called Cleveland Clinic and set up an appointment with him to talk to the surgeon at Cleveland Clinic. That surgeon told him that he was cancer free and that he got the tumor out. He went back and found that guy that goes to my church and he said, hey, not that I was doubting you or whatever. He said it just didn't make sense. He said, I can tell you now that that boy is cancer free and that had to be a miracle. And these are not like spiritual people by any means,
Yeah.
whatever.
Exactly. Yeah.
And God he's got to push you sometimes into those impossible situations in order to set up his glory to prove that he does the impossible.
Yeah.
And uh, during this time, a blessing that we had, that this was just so cool. It was really hard. I mean, all of this was just like really stressful on our family and stuff like this. And somebody called us up and said, I applied Logan for a special wish, which is like one of the Wish foundations to do that. I said, well, he's like almost 20 at this point. You're like, he's not going to get it. That's for kids. They said, no, this organization goes up to 21 years old. So now my son qualifies for this special wish. Then we were like, well, when is it going to be, for our family to do this trip together? They said, we really don't know. Just be ready for whenever it happens. Well, then that's when Cleveland Clinic got involved, and we're like, okay, we're going to have to cancel this because we have 6 weeks of radiation, 4 weeks of, being set aside and not being out in front of people, and
Yeah.
then he was going to go in for surgery. They called us up and said, "Hey, we're scheduling your wish for 2 weeks from now." And then we were like, "What in the world?" And when we met with Cleveland Clinic, they said, "Hey, in order to do this treatment for your son, he needs to have a 2 week break between his two treatments, between
Wow.
chemotherapy and radiation." He says, "We're picking these weeks," which is the exact week, dude, the exact week of the Make-A-Wish trip that we were going on. And
That's crazy.
I said, "That's so cool that you guys coordinated with the Make-A-Wish people." They said, "The who?" They said, "A special wish for kids." They said, "We've not coordinated with anybody whatsoever." It was totally just before this major thing that God organized to the week, to the day, to
Yeah.
make this happen. We got off the trip, and literally one day later, he went into Cleveland Clinic to start his treatments for that stuff. So, but let me give you the biggest but. Let me tell you something that happened, and I'll keep it short. But he was cancer free. January 22nd, 2024, the surgeon came out and stuff. So, and you're just, the whole time we're just praying, God, use this, whatever. And that was our big goal. And so he goes into intensive care, into the ICU, and I couldn't be there, but my wife got to stay, and I go back to the hotel. I'm standing in the lobby trying to get a bottle of water from the front desk and purchase it. And there's a man standing there, literally a broken man. And he's standing there with his son next to him that you could obviously tell was going through chemo. He had the swollen cheeks from the treatments and the bald head and things like that. And then he said, "Sir, I just need to get my son into a room. We have treatments tomorrow, a consult with them." He says, "You don't understand. I just need this to happen," and stuff like this. And so they said, "Okay, we find your room," or whatever. And God just told me, "Go up and talk to this guy." So I go up and talk to this guy, and I said, "You don't know who I am for nothing, but," I said, "I just want you to know." I said, that I'm sure you're here for treatments or whatever." And he said, "Yeah." He said, "My son is doing this and going through these treatments, or we're trying to get him into treatments." And I said, "Can I just tell you, don't give up on God, that God works in mysterious ways." And I said, "Do you pray for your son? Are you a Christian?" And I got a chance to witness to him. And he said, "No, I'm a Christian." But he said, "I've kind of given up on God when it comes to this." He
Mm.
said, "Well, I appreciate the advice, whatever." So I leave, go to my room, get up the next morning, getting ready to take off to go see Logan. He's in the lobby, and he comes up, braces me, and he said, tears in his eyes. And he said, "You know what? You're right. I'm not giving up on God." He said, "I went back to the room, grabbed my son. We got on our face before God." And he said, "I prayed and asked God for a breakthrough, my son." He said, "If God can do it for you, he can do it for me." And it was just like God was in that moment just saying, "This is why I allowed you to go through this hardship.
Yeah.
It's not just the journey of me changing you, it's what I'm going to do through this to change others." The blessings are innumerable, man, but God was at work the whole time.
I love it. That is absolutely incredible. And we'll never know, like you'll never know the full impact
No.
that your journey has had on so many people
Mm.
around the world. Is there any kind of last thoughts or challenges or words of encouragement you give to a pastor who is just really struggling, really
Mm.
just working through hardship right now?
I would say to any pastor, ministry leader, pastor's wife out there listening to this podcast, um, faith is a struggle. And we don't normally interpret it like that, but it doesn't mean that if you lost your faith because you have a bad day or
Yeah.
because you doubt God. God is not afraid of your doubts, and God does not give up on you and your doubts. You're going to have times that you are afraid, but I've often thought, was Daniel afraid as he walked into the lion's den? I mean, he had the faith of God, but that doesn't mean that he wasn't human.
Yeah.
And when you go through these things, just know that the struggle is real, but God is good, and God is faithful even when you're not faithful. And when you doubt and you struggle in your fear, that's the time to go to him and tell him you're afraid. Because a lot of times it's all about praying that God gives you healing and answers. But sometimes that help that you find in a time of need in Hebrews 11:16 is, or 4:16, is you experiencing the help that he gives to minister to your doubting heart in a time of need.
Yeah.
that God picks us up and loves on us, and his mercy is new every day, even when we don't deserve it.
I appreciate you sharing your story with us. I know that this is going to be a help to a lot of people. There may be guys and ladies out there that have some questions or just want some prayer or want to chat with you a little bit about it. Where can people connect with you to find out more about what you have going on, or if they want to be involved in the Baptist Evangelistic Missionary Association? Where can they reach you at?
Well, you can reach out to me on Facebook. It's not hard to find me, Tony Liuzzo. I'm one of the only Liuzzos out there. And then, so reach out to me on Facebook. I don't mind doing this, as crazy as this might be. My cell phone number is 614-560-3590. If you're a pastor or ministry leader, pastor's wife or whatever, reach out to me and my family. And sometimes it takes just talking to somebody that's been down a dark road,
Yeah.
that's been down that path to relate to. And people did that for me, and I would love to do that with others. And so just reach out to us.
And you can reach us here at Pastors Connection Network by going to pastorsconnectionnetwork.com or find us on Facebook at Pastors Connection Network. Thank you, Tony, so much for sharing your life and your story with us. We sure appreciate you being on the podcast.
Yeah, appreciate you having me.
Thank you for joining us on the Pastors Connection podcast. May you be inspired and equipped to lead with grace and purpose. Until we meet again.